think one of the problems I have trouble getting through books is because none of my friends and family are talking about any of the books that I'm reading. And I just think that speaks to the fact that, like, as the years go on, the cultures evolve, the media formats change, and our attention naturally shifts, and it's less of an algorithmic thing and more of just a cultural evolution.
Part of that, I think, is probably true, but I think there's also something happening, which is...
Well, Casey, I need your attention.
Kevin, I'm trying to catch up on my email right now. What is this about?
Well, today on the show, I want to have a conversation about attention.
Kevin, ever since you put your phone in prison for the simple crime of being interesting, you've been fascinated by the topic of attention.
Yes, I am fascinated by attention and the various ways that we direct and misdirect our attention and the various apps and services that are trying to get our attention all the time. And today on the show, we are going to have a conversation about attention. And we are going to have on Chris Hayes. Chris Hayes is the host of MSNBC's nightly news show, All In. He just wrote a book about attention called The Sirens Call: How Attention Became the World's Most Endangered Resource. It comes out next week, and I read an advance copy. Quite good. And Chris argues that attention has become a profoundly valuable commodity in today's world. He argues that we are trapped in a system of attention gathering and maximization that we didn't construct, that we don't have a lot of choice over, and that has created a feeling of alienation among many of the people who feel their attention being pulled in ways that they maybe don't want it to be.
Yeah, it does feel like a condition of modern life that maybe even on most days you will find yourself doing something and think to yourself, I don't even want to be looking at the thing I'm looking at, and yet I'm not sure how I can look away.
Yes, and obviously this is a conversation that has a lot to do with technology and the ways that social media apps and other forms of technology have found new ways to harness attention. I'm excited to talk to Chris about this topic because he is not just a scholar and a critic of the attention economy. He is also a participant in it, just like you and I are. He is a cable news host, and he is in the business of gathering people's attention. He's an attention merchant as well as someone who studies the subject. So I wanted to talk to him not just about his diagnosis of our attention problem, but also what he personally does to harness his attention. I feel like that's an area where I have a lot of trouble, and I know you do too.
That's right, Kevin. And in addition to all of the questions we had for Chris, he turned the tables on us and asked us for a little bit of guidance as he attempts to navigate how AI will transform our attention environment. So that wound up being kind of a fun twist.
Yeah, very fun conversation with someone who I think has a lot of worthwhile thoughts about what is going on in our attention economy and how we might start to fix it. Let's bring him in. Chris Hayes, welcome to Hard Fork.
It's great to be here.
So, Chris, your book is all about the ways that our attention is captured, bought, and sold. And a lot of the book is about tech and the role that new technology plays in determining where our attention goes. I want to start by asking, what, in your view, are the problems with how our attention is currently directed? And is there an ideal state of how our attention is directed?
Well, I think the problems are probably easier. I mean, the forms of attention capitalism that we have at this moment are constantly trying to compel our attention. Like, the best example of this is the physical haptic feedback in the phones, which, you know, and I find there's a funny generational change. Like, the older you are, the more notifications you have on your phone. Like, I don't know if people of that generation don't know how to disable notifications, or they grew up at a time where missing crucial information was really important, so they don't want to miss stuff. But, like, we've all had the experience of being at a table with someone whose phone is just like bzz, 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 bzz. And that physical buzzing, whether it's happening in your pocket or at the table, is triggering like a deep part of your brain chemistry that is like, oh, there's something happening. There's a predator rustling in the bushes. I got to go check it out. So we have engineered a situation where our attention's constantly being compelled against our will. In terms of what the ideal form is, I mean, look, I think human beings like paying attention to all kinds of crazy stuff. And I think to the degree to which that crazy stuff can flourish and people can do it from some place of volition, that's all great. I don't feel like our experience of where we put our attention right now feels particularly volitional.
You make a really interesting point early in your book about how the attention economy, this term that we so often hear used to describe things like social media platforms, is actually much broader than social media, that actually companies like Amazon are also in the attention business in a way because they are trying to direct your attention to not posts, but products. I'd argue that crypto and some of the stuff we're seeing around meme coins is also part of the attention economy. So I guess my question for you is, like, if we're not happy about the role that attention and the attention economy are playing in our lives, as you say, we are not, if we're alienated in the ways that you described, like, who should we be mad at for that?
Well, I think focusing on the platforms is probably a good place to start. I mean, I think that's the place where it's most tangible, and those are the folks that are most clearly profiting off this. I mean, they nicely arrayed themselves into a neat little line at the inauguration to sort of frame themselves for our viewing pleasure. All those people that were at the inauguration, the head of Google and Apple and Amazon and X, those are some of the most responsible entities for what's happening to our attention. But again, it's broader than just those companies because of the era we've entered into of the digital economy, the information age, kind of post-material economic production. I mean, crypto is the ultimate example of it. A meme coin doesn't even give you that, right? The meme coin is the most pure monetization of attention that I've ever seen. And it's kind of elevated up from any physical substrate. It just exists.
Yeah. I mean, what people will sometimes say in the tech industry when they're confronted with challenges about, oh, you're weaponizing attention, you're harvesting attention, they'll try to reframe it in terms of supply and demand. And,
right.
We've talked on this show, and I'm sure you've also had conversations about the two sides of the attention market. There's obviously the case to be made that the supply side is bad, that we should not have exploitative platforms. But I also think there's a demand side problem that we have to reckon with. How do you think about the demand side of the attention market?
I think about it all the time. I mean, there's a long chapter in the book about boredom, which to me is the central seed of the demand side question, right? Why don't we want to be alone with our own thoughts? Fundamentally, that's the question. Why do we have such demand for our attention to be taken? And that, I think, is both a situational question, because I think different forms of living, social arrangements, institutions, and technologies expand or contract our threshold for boredom, but also a very old human one. I mean, Pascal in Pensées in the 17th century says, "I've concluded that all the troubles of man stem from his inability to sit alone in his own chamber." Now, he didn't have TikTok, he didn't even have TV, he didn't have radio, and yet that sense of restlessness is there in the 17th century. So part of this is the lot of being a human, sitting in this one mind we have with its whirling consciousness, and the fact that we have to deal with those own thoughts, and the demand comes from that. It's speaking to something essential in us. Like, very clearly, if you gave Blaise Pascal TikTok or the people he's writing about in the 17th century, they would have been like, hell yes, dude, like, give it to me.
They would die instantly.
They would be dead. They would
kill
be
the medieval peasant.
They would stop eating. They would just be in their chamber going through videos and never forget to eat and drink. 100% true.
It's interesting to think about the idea that human attention has always wanted to be 100% saturated, that people have always been uncomfortable sitting alone with their own thoughts. And it is only now, because of technological innovations, that we can actually saturate it 100%, that for the first time, there now actually is an infinite supply of things to look at and to do. And maybe that's sort of at the root of the discomfort that you're writing about.
I think that is at the root, although I would say one thing to slightly amend that, which I think is quite important. There are certain things we have that are genuinely human universal, like, for instance, hunger, right? There is no human under any social conditions that doesn't experience it. Like, you have to eat, you have to have calories to live. Boredom actually is not a universal human experience. And the reason we know that is because there are societies that live entirely outside of modernity, hunter-gatherer tribes, that, from all that we know, do not experience boredom. There's a great there's an anthropologist who studies Aboriginal people in Australia who I quote in the book, and among the Walpiri people, which is their name, they don't have a word for boredom, and when they have to describe it, they use the English word. It's a literal import, and it's an import both as a lexeme and as an experience. And people that spend a lot of time in non-modern societies will tell you that there is a tremendous amount of sitting alone with your thoughts, sometimes together, sometimes alone. So there is something about the experience of modernity writ large that has a relationship to boredom that not all humans experience in the same way.
Chris, I'm wondering, I can imagine someone hearing this interview or reading your book and saying, well, I'm not sure that I buy the assumption that our attention is sort of more fractured and that we have shorter attention spans than at any point in human history. Because, I observe, and I'm saying this as me, like when I ask people what they're listening to, what they're watching, people are out there listening to 4-hour podcasts, Chris.
Yes.
People are out there watching YouTube videos that are 2.5 hours long. And it seems like the sort of shortening attention spans, which is the classic complaint that older people have about younger people throughout the eons, just doesn't seem to be aligned with the reality, which is that people are actually willing to sit through long and, to my mind, boring things when it suits their needs. So how do you reconcile the crisis that many adults are feeling about, especially young people's attention spans, with the popularity of these super long-form shows and media products?
I think it's a great question. I think there's a few ways to think about this. The first is that I do think it's important to distinguish what I'm going to call philosophical questions from empirical ones. And I think this is a place where things get wrapped around the axle a little bit. So what I mean by that is you might, whether people's attention spans are getting shorter is kind of an empirical question. Whether people are getting more anxious and depressed is an empirical question. And then there's like a deeper philosophical question about what is a good life. So here's an example. If I had a friend who is spending 13 hours a day playing video games, you might say, well, that's bad for you, or it's bad for your health. And maybe if you did randomized control trials, it turns out it isn't. Like there aren't bad health outcomes associated with it. But if you ask me if I think he's living the good life, I don't think he is. And I'll defend that to my grave. That's not an empirical claim. That's a philosophical and spiritual one about what it means, right? So first, I think it's important when we're diagnosing this question, a lot of stuff gets wrapped around the axle of, are you making an empirical claim about in a technical sense, people's attention spans getting shorter? Or are you making a claim like I'm making in the book is that there is a genuine and profound feeling of alienation in which we are not in control of our own minds? So I'm making the latter claim. Now, as to the specific thing about the shortening of attention spans, I love the fact that people listen to 4-hour podcasts. One of the cool things about what's happened to attention markets, because they do not have gatekeepers who predetermine what people will pay attention to it, and things just are thrown into the marketplace to sink or swim, there's actually been discoveries of stuff people will pay attention to that no one would have greenlit before. I think the fact that podcasts exist out of algorithmic environments and through an open, old school open internet protocol called RSS is a central part of why you have seen the flourishing of them in these 4-hour ways, and actually speaks to the fact that the architecture of attentional spaces matters a tremendous amount.
Yeah, I buy that. Do you buy it, Kevin?
I'm not sure. My explanation for the rise in popularity of 4-hour-long podcasts is basically that they are not competing for the same type of attention that a very long magazine article is. Magazine articles.
It's background attention.
It's background attention. You're maybe giving 10% of your attention to it while you're folding laundry or washing the dishes or driving your car.
And I have another point I would make is I think that I know for all of my favorite podcasts that I just listen to for fun, they're about the nichiest things in my life. And typically they're about the things that none of my friends or family actually want to talk to me about day to day. And I think this is inextricable from the problem that you're writing about, Chris, because the reason those podcasts are so exciting to me is part of me can't even believe that this media exists, because I grew up in the 80s and 90s when I just had to sort of absorb whatever was, mass
culture.
mainstream.
Yeah.
But now media creation is so democratized that no matter, you name the nichiest thing in existence and there's a great 2-hour podcast about it. So I think that's the kind of the double-edged sword here, right?
But I think but the thing that you're identifying, I think, was true of the pre-commercial internet. I mean, that was the great thing about the internet before it got taken over by the platforms, right? So in that sense, I think that's actually a great thing about the architecture. Again, I am a partisan of the internet. I got my first internet connection at 14 and I eschewed AOL and I got like a direct internet service provider. I like was on surfing the web on Link's text browser before Andreessen put out Mosaic. Like I've been on the internet for a minute, okay? And so all that stuff is true. I think that question too about these different forms of attention, I think it's really interesting to think about people doing more than one thing at once, which is also this kind of supply expansion. Like I write about in the book coming across my kid playing a video game while watching a video in a little picture and being like, what are you doing? And being like, don't do that. I don't like that. That does not make me feel good. And he's like, you watch TV with your phone all the time, literally all the time. Like,
right.
Like, fair point, but not you.
I mean, I can imagine another reaction that people might be having to, hearing, three sort of products of the media as it was constructed, 10 or 20 years ago, complaining about all the kids and their attention, and just saying to themselves, like, these guys are just mad that people aren't paying attention to them, right? Like you don't hear, Jake Paul complaining about the attention economy, right? Because he is a beneficiary of the changes.
Yes, although read an interview with Mr. Beast. I mean, it's really interesting, actually, because he in interviews, he talks about this guy's a genius at hacking this. And, like, he finds it oppressive, actually. He said that in interviews. And I want to be clear here. I actually think the kids are in better shape than the elders on this. I think one of the things I think that happens with this concern is that it gets projected onto children obsessively. It's, I think, worse on people older. I think actually they're better at screening information. I think it's they handle it better. They're more native to it. And one of the points of the book is I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about myself, my parents, like, I don't think this is a problem with the youth. I think this is a problem for all of us.
So, like, what would make you feel better about your own attention? Like, what are some things that could happen that would make you say, okay, we're starting to get this problem under control?
Do you mean individually for myself or collectively?
Yeah. For you personally, because you're sort of saying that
just
a lot of what you're writing
books.
about is about your own experience. Yeah.
I think a big marker is reading books. I think like that is, to me, a real concrete example. And I have forced myself to do more reading. Part of writing this book, honestly, was binding myself to the mast that made me read books. Like, I had to go back and read works of philosophy I hadn't touched either in years or never touched. And that's hard reading. That's the kind of reading you don't do when you leave college or grad school, where you're not just sitting at the beach. Like, it's like each sentence. And that work, getting those muscles back, was really hard and invigorating. And that us being able to do that collectively is pretty important to me. I think actually, like, again, this I will 100% to cop to sounding like a fogey. I genuinely think self-governance hinges on our ability to do that.
What about your own sort of personal tech stack? Like, how do you direct your attention? What's on your home screen? Do you use any apps or services that are sort of designed to help you focus your attention?
For a while, I really, really relied on being a power user of Twitter and having different feeds and different people. And that has been shot to hell because it's just a useless... It's a useless tool for what I used to use it for, which was actually getting information. You just can't really rely on that for anymore. I'm trying to recreate a bit of that in Bluesky with some success. The degree to which you can connect yourselves to people with actual genuine domain expertise in a given thing, that's the most valuable thing for me to seek out in the internet and to try to maximize my ability to funnel into me.
Chris, I can't let you come on this show without asking you about AI. And
what is that? I haven't heard of that. Are they doing something with that now?
We talk about it once or twice. I can imagine two ways that someone like you could feel about the rise of AI, and they're essentially mutually exclusive. One is AI is going to be horrible for our collective attention harnessing and focusing because we're all going to be confronted every day with a slew of hyper-personalized media that is generated specifically to cater to our tastes. And boy, if you thought people were addicted to their phones before, just wait till they've got their chatbots in there telling them that they love them and all this personalized media. And so our attention is going to be harder to corral than ever before. I can also imagine a more optimistic take that AI is going to help us with our attention because we can dispatch AI to go read all the news for us and summarize what's most important, or watch every video on TikTok and tell us what the best memes are, and we can kind of offload some of that cognitive burden to AI. Of those two scenarios,
I love AI as like your meme servant.
Yes, honestly, this will be that
Go
to
find
me
me
is
the-
AGI.
I mean,
I want only the
literally is an
dankest.
AI
I want
meme
the
servant.
5 dankest memes today. Please go retrieve for me the 5 dankest memes.
But like when you think about AI and attention, do you feel like one of those scenarios is more likely than the other?
I feel totally lost on AI in the sense that I have zero trust for my own instincts of what it will be. I think the thing I think about it most is like the late 90s tech boom, where there was both a lot of genuine innovation and a lot of like ludicrous froth. And then a lot of things that people were trying to do before the technology was there.
Yeah. We have
What do you think? What do you think?
So I'm optimistic about this, in part because I read the chapter of your book where you talk about spam and the sort of equivalence of spam in today's attention environment. And I know that compared to 10 years ago, I encounter a lot less spam in my email inbox than I used to. And that is not because of anything that I've done. That's because AI got better at filtering out spam. And so I do have some hope that, and we're starting to see this. I know someone who programmed a ChatGPT task the other day to email him or give him a message every morning of everything that Donald Trump did the day before ranked in order of importance. And like that kind of thing feels possible to me in a way that it did not a couple of years ago. And that could actually save us some time watching cable news. No offense.
Well, we don't want that. But let me ask you, can I keep asking you questions? Is that all right?
Yes.
Yep.
How much are you two using ChatGPT in your workflow?
Constantly for everything.
Every day for everything. Sorry.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. I gotta do. I'm not. I feel I feel a little like I'm just walking around. I'm listening to the Strokes in my skinny jeans, like a just dude that just stopped, and I can't. Like it just seems. I don't know, like a new thing. I got to go interact with a new thing. I don't want a new thing.
Wait, can I say something about AI and attention, though?
Yes.
Because, Chris, you were sort of joking a few minutes ago about, an AI meme servant. That is explicitly what TikTok was set up to be, right? Is we are going to look at literally everything, and just based on engagement signals, we're going to serve up the things that you're most likely to enjoy. And the state of the art is already pretty good. I think one reason why TikTok got banned is we have this sense that, gosh, it's kind of spooky good at understanding what I like. So if the state of the art is that good, I truly believe that the next generation is going to get even more and more compelling. And to the extent you think that we're in an attention crisis, I don't see how AI doesn't just exacerbate that.
Well, AI will create the TikToks and distribute the TikToks, and then I will use my AI servant to go watch all the TikToks for me.
Can I make another point? We've gotten sort of very shaggy and
we're way
loose
over
in this,
time, but it's
and
fine.
we're way over time, but I'm enjoying this.
I'm sorry. I really did hide, but I'm just curious how you guys use it.
I think we can all agree it was Kevin's fault. So you were talking earlier about books, and this is something that I share with you. Every year, I think, gosh, I wish I could read more books. And last year, the New York Times, great newspaper, put out a list of the 100 best books of the new century,
of the 21st
I guess?
century.
Of the 21st century. And
Yep.
so my boyfriend and I, every day they would release like 10 new books, and we'd go through them. Oh, which ones have you read? And so I
That's
created
great.
this list, and I'm like now working through it, and I've just started a 900-page book called 2666 by Roberto Bolaño.
Yes, Bolaño.
I'm about 250 pages in. It's a bit of a struggle. And
It is.
part of me feels like exactly everything you said, Chris, of like, gosh, if only Twitter had not destroyed my brain, I'd be sailing through this thing. But there's this other element, though, which is just that but books are not as culturally relevant as they were like when I was an English major at Northwestern University. And I think one of the problems I have trouble getting through books is because none of my friends and family are talking about any of the books that I'm reading. And I just think that speaks to the fact that, like, as the years go on, the cultures evolve, the media formats change, and our attention naturally shifts, and it's less of an algorithmic thing and more of just a cultural evolution.
Part of that, I think, is probably true, but I think there's also something happening, which is 26/6 is a hard book. I mean, it's not an easy book.
Wait, so you've read it? Can I just talk to you about it afterwards? Can I just text you things?
We
definitely.
can move this to a sidebar. Yeah.
I'm enjoying this.
So it's a hard book. But the other thing I would say, something I've really noticed is books, movie, all these, everything. The form of things is influenced by the attentional environment they're in. So one of the things I've really been noticing, if you go back and you watch a movie from the 1970s and 1980s, they're paced so much more slowly. They are so slow. And why are they slow? They're slow because what else are you going to do, dude? You just spent $15 or $6 or $5. You're in there. You got nowhere to be. You got nothing to do. If Robert Altman wants to take his sweet time setting up the first 20 minutes of this movie. And so we are now, because things respond to the attentional environment, everything is conditioned to move much more quickly. And so when you try to get something from outside that, it feels slow. I mean, even writing this book where I was working so hard to keep people's attention, to stay present vocally in people's ears, like, it does change the way that everything gets created.
Yeah. I mean, but again, fast forward to today. Watch the 4th episode of any Netflix show. They didn't need to make it. You could just delete it and move right on. You know what I mean? Sometimes I think things are still pretty slowly paced.
Yeah. Well, Chris Hayes, thank you so much for coming on. The book, The Sirens Call, is available next week, January 28th. I have read it. It is quite good, and I recommend it. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.